I'm going to be talking about the man, the myth, the large estate. It has been over 200 years since the world first met Mr. Darcy on the pages of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. So why is he so popular still? And what has changed in all that time? Today, we're going to quickly look at the first impressions the world ever had of Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy and his large estate. Now, we don't have time to look at every single instance of Darcy in all of history because we would be here for days. I know some of us wouldn't mind that, and we'd actually voluntarily sign up for that, like said tour. But for now, we're just going to be looking at firsts and major pop culture events. So get your spelling salts, because this is going to be a swoon-worthy visual history. All right, first up, this riveting illustration, as you can all see. It is the 1894 Peacock edition of Pride and Prejudice. This is very important because it's our first illustrated Darcy. And if nobody has claimed Darcy Illustrated, I mean, that's a great brand that you should just get on, because that magazine's waiting to be to happen. Okay, I'm going to note that Pride and Prejudice had been illustrated before this in 1832, but we didn't get a Mr. Darcy then. Like, can you imagine a publisher missing out on the opportunity to make an illustrated Darcy? Well, they did. So this is the first time we see any kind of visualization of this hero in 1894, and he's very Victorian. You can see that in this photo, he's looking very haughty. And it's captioned in the original illustration as, "She is very tolerable." And I think we all know what is about to go down in this dance hall, and it's not good. It's fun because in this Victorian illustration, he looks delightfully sexy for his time. I'd like to bring your attention to those sexy, sexy calves of his. Yeah, that was a big deal. Showing off those calves, just swoon-worthy. His vest and coat are a little bit more Victorian than would have been appropriate for the actual book in the time. But you know what? It's a step up from what we might have gotten from the 1830s version, which would have had him competing with massive sleeves and sky-high hair. And I think we're okay with this. All right, in 1940, we get our first big screen Darcy. This adaptation of Pride and Prejudice starred Laurence Olivier as Mr. Darcy and Greer Garson as Lizzie. The poster here reads, for those who can't see it, "When pretty girl teased men into marriage." This movie is heavily 1830s. If you haven't watched it, you can find like free versions of this everywhere online. It is bizarre and wonderful in its own way. And you'll remember that the first illustrated Jane Austen was 1830. So it's really funny that this is not appropriate for the actual novel, but it is appropriate for it matches the first visualizations of her work. So it's kind of fascinating that it's a controversial thing and that it strayed so far from the novels, and it's also ridiculous in its costuming. So as fun and as thrilling as this version is, the Hollywood legend behind it is actually something to behold. So let's take a turn about the TCM archives for a second. MGM's Pride and Prejudice was supposed to start filming in October of 1936, but after a death, production changes, and a war in Europe, it got pushed back. So hold on to your spelling salts. This is where our barouche ride through Mr. Darcy's legacy gets wild. A biography of Laurence Olivier says that MGM considered casting Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable for the leading roles in this film, in this first on-screen Pride and Prejudice. And it was because of their success in Gone with the Wind. So take a second and think about it. At one time, we almost had Clark Gable as our first big screen Mr. Darcy, opposite Vivien Leigh. The Hollywood legend continues. Gable turned down the role of Darcy, obviously. He felt he was not suited for the part. Olivier apparently accepted the role of Darcy because he understood Vivien Leigh was to be his co-star. And she ended up being replaced because an MGM exec didn't like that she was having an affair with Olivier and thought that it would generate bad publicity for the film. Olivier and Leigh did eventually marry, but it doesn't seem like Laurence Olivier went into the production very happy. Apparently he said of the movie, I was very unhappy with the picture. It was difficult to make Darcy into anything more than an unattractive looking prig, and Darling Greer seemed to me all wrong as Elizabeth. So there was not much on-screen chemistry for our first big screen Mr. Darcy, and I think that comes across if you've not seen that film. In 1980, we get a BBC series starring Elizabeth Garby as Lizzie and David Runtoul as Mr. Darcy. So reminder for this one that we do not yet have the World Wide Web, but we do have Hairspray. And that's about all I can really say about this version. Moving on, this is what we're really here for, and I acknowledge that. 1995 brought us a 6-episode British television drama adapted by Andrew Davies with Jennifer Ale and Colin Firth, starring as Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. So let's take one more trip into Hollywood lore, because it's fun. Colin Firth almost didn't take this role. In an article for the New York Times, you can learn why. The producer says that Colin Firth mentioned he'd actually never read a word of Austen and said that it was girly stuff, right? Mr. Firth agreed to read the script, liked it, and then changed his mind, then changed it again. So as he headed off to America, the producer thrust a script into his arms along with an 8-page letter explaining to Colin Firth why he had to take the part. When the plane touched down in LA, he called her and he surrendered, and he is now the iconic Mr. Darcy that hops into a pond for us all. The producer of that series told reporters that she intended to bring the real subjects of the novel out for this adaptation: sex and money. The tabloids at the time really jumped on this, and like some headlines read "Sex Romp Jane Austen." The producer later said that what I meant by sexy was smoldering looks across the room or hand touching. So this sentiment of a gritty, sexy adaptation shouldn't sound like anything new to any Austen fans or historical drama fans. We hear it used to describe new adaptations of classics all the time. Why these need to be infused with sexiness might be to get people excited and new audiences. I still personally think it's a little bit of like Bronte propaganda machine around like how heroes need to be broody and Byronic. That's just my opinion. The producer of this version, who saved it all by getting Colin Firth, said that it was a lively book and they wanted to bring out its vitality. They didn't want people thinking of stiff, people sitting in stiff drawing rooms. And, I don't think anyone could say that of this version. Stiff drawing rooms indeed. We get lively balls, walks in the countryside, and most importantly, Mr. Darcy stripping down and taking a dip in a pond on his vast estate and coming out dripping in his now clinging wet white shirt to encounter none other than Elizabeth Bennet, the woman who has rejected him. What a scene. And yes, we get smoldering looks across the room, but that might have been helped by the fact that Colin Firth and Jennifer Ale were actually dating at the time. So in 2005, I dragged my grandma to the theater to watch the Joe Wright adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Was this the start of my Jane Austen love affair? Did I subsequently burn through about 3 DVDs of this movie? And I was, only stopped by streaming coming into effect. Maybe. But I really enjoyed this version. The screenwriter for this adaptation wanted to apparently keep it closer to the book, but the director didn't. It is set in an earlier period, and it is known as the dirty, muddy hymn version of Pride and Prejudice. Again, it's funny that all these adaptations are grittier, dirtier ones. In an attempt to appeal to more, quote, sentimental viewers, a final scene before the credits was added to the US version, and that was the kiss between the married Darcys. That did not appear in the UK version. And after the release, a UK-based petition came up that requested that the kiss be reinserted into the DVD releases. So that's a minor consolation. Looking at the Darcy timeline, we get a deluge of adaptations from 1995 onward, from Wishbone to Zombies to Bollywood and beyond. The period between Colin Firth and Macfadyen is filled with adaptations in a wide variety of Darcys. And I'd also like to note that in 1995, fans would have had access to forums on the World Wide Web. So there's a big benefit there, and I think that's also what changes how fandom is working around these things, because it really gives communities a space. And 1995 came out at a beautiful confluence around development of online communities and fan spaces, where people would have been eating that stuff up. So I think that has an influence in shaping how we can look at Mr. Darcy and how he changes across pop culture, because he's not just confined to motion pictures that are funded or TV movies or published books. People can write him anywhere, anytime, in any way they want him. Essentially, we can make Darcy what we want him to be, the ideal person, whatever that is. Fast forward to today, and he's everywhere. He's in Unleashing Mr. Darcy, an adaptation about dog shows. He shows up on listicles about divorce quotes, and he has his own action figure, a little Funko. So, is he a meme of himself? I think through important points in time, we've gotten a variety of interpretations of him depending on what generations think the ideal person is. And I think that's why we have so many versions of him now, because everyone is able to define him as they want him to be. And that's fine. I think that that's just especially a part with these online communities where you can define your own things, and you can make your headcanon. He's going to live on in memes. He's going to live on in statues, in this statue that's put in a pond. And every year when Hallmark makes a poorly adapted movie, we're going to have to deal with that too. But he's just going to live on, because I think what stays true is that people like him, love him, they want to marry him, and they want others to be him. Because of that, we're always going to see small brushstrokes of him in all these various Darcys. Because Jane Austen wrote a man that Lizzie Bennet herself could fall in love with, and it seems like everyone else could as well.
Go to nerdnite.com to find a Nerd Night event near you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for our latest presentation.